Well, my name is Jim Cobb. I'm with the Stadium Investment Corporation, and I would like to welcome everybody to the community update on the stadium development. Very much appreciate you guys taking the time to join us for what we hope will be an informative update. I'd like to start by recognizing Councilwoman Torres and Councilwoman Sandoval, who I believe are on the line, but Councilwoman would like to add an additional welcome at this time. That would be great. I would like to remind you to unmute your microphone to do that.
Hi, this is Jamie. Thank you so much for all of the folks attending and for the Stadium District planning the update. Really looking forward to what you're presenting today. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Great, and thank you. And Councilwoman Sandoval, are you on? Okay, well, when she joins us, would welcome any comments that she might have, but why don't we go ahead and get started. Matt Sugar with the Metropolitan Football Stadium District, I'll hand it over to you and we'll begin our presentation.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone again for joining us. We're going to do an update here. Some of the information that we're going to go over you've probably seen in the past. We're going to go through through some visuals I don't think that a lot of you have seen. So again, I'm appreciative that you're all here. I'm going to go back a little bit in our history and explain. I think this is always a helpful reminder of where we came from and where we're trying to go with this project. Again, I'm Matt Sugar, and I'm with the Stadium District, and many of you might know of that name, but what it is basically a political subdivision of the state, kind of like an RTD. Essentially what we are is we're a special district made up of the 7 metro area Denver counties that own the 100 acres roughly in and around the football stadium. We were created on behalf of the citizens of Colorado. We established a district, a special district, that basically our one charge is to oversee the football stadium that was basically built 3/4 by taxpayer dollars and 1/4 by the Denver Broncos owner at the time. A bill introduced was passed into law and collected 0.1% sales tax. It started back in 1998. That sales tax has since run out in 2011, but again, it was a 0.1% sales tax that built the $400 million stadium. So fast forward, a new stadium that opened, we're always reminded of this date, September 10th of 2001, was the first Bronco football game there. We actually won that game, and Ed McCaffrey broke his leg. But anyway, fast forwarding, over time, if you think about this stadium, the size, 100 acres, 1.8 million square feet. It's a gigantic building, and over time, it requires a good amount of upkeep. Several years ago now, or a few years ago now, we went and did a conditions assessment on the building, and realizing that in order to keep this building viable for the next 25 to 30 years, we're going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 million. That $700 million, again, the only money that the district collects is revenue from the Broncos, i.e. rent, and naming rights revenue. It doesn't get us anywhere near that dollar figure. Neither the district or the Broncos are interested in going back to the taxpayer and asking for more, so we're trying to work with what we have. The idea here is that we would join forces, which we have, and create an entity, a non-profit entity. Then Jim will talk about this in more detail a little bit later, but it's the Stadium Investment Corp. And the idea of that investment corp is to basically long-term lease the property in and around the stadium, and that lease money would go back into the facility and negate having to go back to the taxpayer, another source of revenue, over the next 30 years. Therein lies the idea. So again, when we talk about developing this site, I think it's important to note that the dollars that are created from the revenue of development would go back into the facility. Again, it's 1.8 million square feet. I can't emphasize that enough. If you think about what stadiums are being built today, in today's dollars, you're looking at $2 billion for a state-of-the-art stadium in today's dollars, where we still have a $400.8 million stadium that we can make perfectly viable for the next 25 or 30 years with some investment. So that's kind of the creation, and that's the idea behind this whole concept. I'll just make one last note. Again, I mentioned earlier that the stadium district is basically made up of the 7 counties, the 7 county in and around Denver: Adams, Arapahoe, Boulder, Denver, Douglas. So they all have representatives to this board. They're a volunteer board. I work closely with the Denver Broncos organization. They have a division called the Stadium Management Company, and they oversee the building. And since we opened in 2001, the Broncos have actually put in about $100 million into the facility of their own money. So again, that kind of lays the groundwork for this concept of a nonprofit entity to create the development in and around the site. And to get into a little bit more detail and describe how this all works, I will turn it over to Jim Cobb.
Thanks, Matt. One thing I just want to mention to the group, I think it's there at the top of everybody's screen, but this presentation is being recorded and will be available after the meeting for additional review. Matt, the only thing that I might add for the group is the sort of the technical relationship between the stadium district and the Denver Broncos or Stadium Management Company is the long-term lease that the Broncos have with the stadium district, and that's the legal relationship, I guess I would describe it as, between the two entities. As Matt mentioned, we formed Stadium Investment Corporation last December. And when I say we, and I always have to be careful when I'm using that term when talking about this project, it's at the board level represented by both the stadium district and the Denver Broncos. And Stadium Investment Corporation is charged with managing the horizontal development of this project, moving through entitlements with the city, and designing and constructing through a metropolitan improvement district that we created all of the horizontal infrastructure along with parking structures that are a part of the development. And then back to Matt, another one of Matt's points, Stadium Investment Corporation, nor the Stadium District, nor the Denver Broncos have any intention of getting into the business of vertically developing this real estate. We are planning to bring in a private developer or private developers for the construction of the various components of the project. And as Matt mentioned, as opposed to selling a developer a site for an office building or a multifamily project, our plan is to do long-term ground leases and use that lease income to go back into the capital through the stadium district into the capital and improvements for the stadium. But I do want to emphasize Stadium Investment Corporation is a nonprofit and will enter into long-term ground leases with private developers for the vertical construction. You will see in this presentation, we do have a conceptual plan of what this might look like in terms of a mix of uses and various land uses. I will tell you, and we've looked throughout the country, there are a lot of examples of stadium and arena related developments going on, and there's some good and bad as we've seen across the country, but we really want to create a true neighborhood that does work great on a game day, and it's where you want to be on a Sunday afternoon in October, but works just as well on a Thursday evening at 5:30 in August. We really want to see a 365-day neighborhood that does work great for games and events, but also works great on every day of the year. We have spent the last 2.5 years really working on this. We worked with the city and community planning and development on a master plan that was adopted by City Council in June of 2019. We had between between steering committee and public meetings, I guess we had about half a dozen public meetings that had over 1,000 points of feedback on the project as we moved through that master planning process. We also, and I mentioned this briefly, and I'll mention it once again briefly, we also formed a Metropolitan Improvement District to be able to publicly finance the infrastructure that was approved by City Council way back in December of 2018. So this been a lot of time, a lot of work with the city and with the community on this to get to where we are today. We have work ahead of us and look forward to those continued relationships. And so I will, at this point, turn over the presentation to Don Brandis with Matrix Design and Andy Rockmore of Shears Atkins Rockmore, who we've been working with, as I mentioned, for the last 2.5 years.
Thanks, Jim and Matt. That was a great introduction. And frankly, many of you that are on this may have seen parts of this, but the intent of this is not a presentation so much as just really an update of what we've been up to over the last several months. As Jim and Matt both mentioned, we got started in very early 2018. We've been working on this for well over 2 years. The master plan, as many of you were engaged in that process, was adopted back in June of 2019, and it was unanimously adopted by City Council. We were, I think, I may stand corrected on this, either the second or third planning project that processed through the large development framework, the LDR, LDF process. Actually, that was a 4 to 6 month work effort that actually was very instrumental in helping us actually, frame what we needed to do, how we needed to move forward, what the process of review was. So it's been a good process, but that was a relatively new element. Since July, we have been working earnestly on the infrastructure master plan, and I think many of you are familiar with that. But as Jim mentioned and Matt mentioned, it's primarily the horizontal level of improvements in terms of the storm drainage, it's the utility network and infrastructure, it's the mobility, as well as the open space and parks elements and other elements that are included. We've been through one review of that we submitted back in July, and we're probably 2 to 3 weeks out from submitting the second level of revision of the IMP, of the Infrastructure Master Plan. And I guess I would just say it's not a very exciting process. It's heavily oriented toward civil engineering and infrastructure, and as has been mentioned, the horizontal level of improvements. But with that, Andy and the team have been instrumental in terms of framing the building massing and the land uses and the urban design and the parks and open space, which we're really anxious to sort of share with you where we are in that process. As most of you know, beyond the Infrastructure Master Plan, there are the development agreements, there's the community benefits agreement, there are development standards and guidelines required, the rezoning process. There's much yet to be developed based on the Infrastructure Master Plan. So that's yet ahead of us, and I think in the months to come, we're working hard on the Infrastructure Master Plan.
Another important distinction here is what the Stadium Investment Corporation is providing. You can see that here on the left. It's primarily the horizontal infrastructure, the streets, the parks, and the mobility network. But along with that is a zoning effort to provide enough density and development to create what Jim and Matt were talking about, an everyday neighborhood. So although a developer will come along and actually design and build those buildings, we have been guiding that process, and we're excited to show you the results of both here in the next few slides. So one of the key things that we heard from the community throughout this process is the desire to fill in this gap. Right now, these 52 acres of surface parking lots have helped to create a barrier between a lot of the neighborhoods you can see here on the screen. And the primary objective of a lot of what we have done through mobility and open space and development has been to bridge that gap, to make it more than just another way to go through, but really both a destination and a bridge. So this diagram pretty well sums up how this development can make important connections throughout the city.
Yeah, I would just add, Andy, that and Jim said it in his introduction, is the ownership group from day one made it very clear. We're not converting parking lots into buildings. This damn well better be a neighborhood. We're surrounded by 7 neighborhoods and an emerging neighborhood in terms of River Mile, the Auraria campus, and others that basically has a context and history to the neighborhood. Obviously, Sun Valley, the Decatur Station Area Plan that was approved several years ago actually talks a lot about the extension of the land use in our area. And frankly, it was several months in discussions with the city planning department in terms of, do we use the Decatur Station Area Plan and update it? And the idea way back when, 2 years ago, is no, this is a special neighborhood, and we're sensing that from the ownership group to make it unique and peculiar. So the adjacency of Jefferson Park and Sloan's Lake and Sun Valley has been and continues to be, in terms of the public engagement, as we're doing this evening, and throughout the master planning process, been a real influence on the overall development of the project.
Go for it, Don.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but we spent a lot of time looking at basically the gateways. This illustrates that the orange-yellow areas basically to the northwest is the 17th Street and Dick Connor Gateway, which we feel is very, very important. We think, coming back down to what we're calling Elliott Street in Colfax is another gateway that basically is an entree into the project, and we spent a lot of time locating that, thinking about that. You'll notice that Elliott is a curved linear street that begins to reflect the axial relationships of the stadium. If you take the 50-yard line and look at how the stadium was originally laid out, we're wanting to really orient Elliott into the stadium park and do that. Parenthetically, I would also mention you're looking at the cloverleaf, and we had a meeting as recently as last week. It was about 2.5-hour meeting with the consultants and with the city on the Colfax federal cloverleaf study. And so we're coordinating. I want to assure everybody that's on this that we're not acting independently. We're working closely with that group to make sure that not only the configuration of the interchange, but the adjacency in terms of the land uses are complementary. To the south, probably one of the more important gateways and connections is Howard and Decatur. And Decatur has become a major north-south connection, and it's one that we're really paying a lot of attention to in terms of the connection not only to Sun Valley, but the relationship to TOD and RTD and to Lakewood Gulch. Moving a little bit east, the connection basically of the Stadium Parkway. The Stadium Parkway, maybe you could refer to that, Andy, is the major east-west parkway that transects the entire site. And so the gateway to our Riverside Park area and the terminus of that is something that we're wanting to develop and design as being very special into Riverside Park. And then south of that basically is as most of you know, the old West Colfax gateway, and we're paying particular attention to that. I guess just quickly, and many of you may not know this, there are, based on this grid, which is historic, and for those that have studied the history of the city of Denver, George Kessler, when he laid out the 34 neighborhoods decades ago, made sure that there were neighborhood parks, that there were parkways and boulevards, and we've learned a lesson from that. And this plan, this grid reflects 8 different street cross-sections, which is driving the city crazy, to be candid with you and Dottie, in terms of looking at those cross-sections. But the fact is, the ownership group has really pleaded with us to make sure that each of these streets is a streetscape, is that it reflects the adjacent land use in terms of activating the streetscape for pedestrians and for bicycle patterns, as well as providing for parking and emergency access. So that's probably more detail than we need, but we're studying this in great detail through the infrastructure master planning process right now.
I think a few other things, Tom, that we have been really intentional to provide things like parking on the perimeter in order to do 2 things, really, to create a neighborhood that will not have a lot of through traffic. And also it allows some of these views from the neighborhoods to remain through the development and to the city. So on the previous plan, you could see that there are parking structures over here and a fairly significant district parking structure on the west side here, but they are built into the hill purposefully to, again, provide easy access to parking. This development is interesting because it is really not a through place. Cherry Creek is a place that you go through in order to get to other places. Lodo, of course, Central Platte Valley. But here you pass through, which is very interesting, on the viaduct, and you get a really unique view from above the development. But what this has the potential to become, and we've studied this at length, is a real people place. A pedestrian-friendly and bike-friendly environment, like I said, because it doesn't have a lot of through streets. So we have taken that and really pushed what you see here on these street types. The Stadium Parkway, which winds its way down from east to west, has an abundance of bike facilities and wide sidewalks. Festival Street, which was a vision all the way back in 2013 in the Decatur Federal Plan to be not only a street for vehicles, but equally weighted towards peds and bikes, and will be closed at certain times for festivals and special events. And that really is the consolidation, the heart of this neighborhood. And then you can also see the very different character here of Old West Colfax with much lower buildings and a thinner right-of-way. And then, of course, the Colfax Viaduct, which we'll get to later, but there's some really exciting ideas about how to make that one of the centerpieces of this project.
Yeah, I think what's unique, could you just go back one, Andy? I think, and Andy said this very, very well, but, you know, the illustration that we're sharing with you in terms of just looking at the massing is one of 100, you know, as Jim and Matt said, we're not the vertical developer. So working with the city, there is a diversity of architectural massing. And I think our effort, what we've been trying to do is also bring that diversity and activation down to the streetscapes. And I think that's really beginning to work well.
So we're showing here some just qualitative images of what we imagine these to be. You can see here Decatur Street is a relatively typical Denver street. It's an 80-foot right-of-way, has two-way traffic. All of the streets, by the way, are two-way. And landscaping, pedestrian activity on both sides. Stadium Parkway is a really interesting street because as one enters the neighborhood, you have some buildings on one side, and then the stadium and all of the other surrounding infrastructure on the other. It's a fairly wide street, but we have, as we said, this is a major bicycle connection from west to east and onto the river. We're really excited about that.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I know we're going to get through this, but the Stadium Parkway, as Andy said, on the north side is obviously primarily stadium-related uses, and we really wanted to make it a parkway and a boulevard. So there was an extensive effort to really make sure that the amenity area and for the trees and the streetscapes really reflect that and slow traffic down.
We have a number of alleys in this development, and what that really helps us do is serve all of the buildings that we have a number of different uses, residential, office, commercial uses, and it allows us to not interrupt the pedestrian flow and the streetscape with a bunch of curb cuts. So we've carefully placed service alleys, but also allowed them to be wide enough so that they can be pleasant places and places for people, really. We love the idea that's being found around the city that, again, like we said, this is a place for people. Most will be walking, not a lot of through traffic. So we envision these alleys wider than typical, can be both places for service and pedestrians to get to and from offices and residences. And also you can see on the bottom, Old West Colfax Ave, a 60-foot right-of-way, and with different street treatments. You see Brooklyn here on the right, pretty exciting, and really almost a neighborhood within this neighborhood with a different character and type.
Festival Street is really our, it's our courtyard. To be very candid with you, there's not another street like it in Denver. It's 100 feet wide. We're basically on the pedestrian plaza areas dedicating about 32 feet to either side of the travel lanes and of the on-street parking to community events and plazas. We're talking to the city about this being a curbless, open plaza area that would be used throughout the year, obviously for game day activities as programmed, but again, primarily for community events. It's a stage. We really want to encourage, by the adjacency of the urban uses, but also to design this in terms of the pavement, the lighting, the plant material, the signage, and the wayfinding to make this a gathering spot. So Festival Street is obviously our major north-south connector to the north, to the center of the stadium plaza, and to the south to Lakewood Gulch. It basically visually and practically from a pedestrian standpoint, as Andy said, it's not considered, because of the grid system, to be a major vehicular area. It really is more of a pedestrian relationship. Stadium Circle Drive, as many of you can see, is a throughway, and we want to think about the Riverside Park, and I'll talk about it in a minute when we talk about the open space and the park system, but that is a gateway for us. It's a terminus of the Parkway Stadium, and so we really want to think about and program this as a very, very special area. It's interesting to note in terms of the parks and open space, and I could probably go on for hours on this, but basically page 72, this is out of the master plan, and it basically, the master plan designates 5 different open space and park areas, starting at the very top. I'm not sure if you can read that, but the neighborhood parks, and really talks about those hosting festivals and events and community gathering spots. And so we've designated with C and D, which we'll show in a minute, where those might be located. The second are pocket parks, and we hope to populate the entire project area with a series of pocket parks that are smaller, passive activity areas that we can really use and that the neighborhood can use throughout the year. The public use parks are areas like Andy talked about a little bit perhaps underneath the Kovacs Viaduct area, and we'll show you some programming ideas that we have for that. The enhanced public space is what we just got done talking about in terms of our vision of Festival Street. I think that is a stage for us to really activate throughout the year a lot of activities. And then, as we mentioned, B&E or riverfront and riparian areas, and frankly, it includes, in our opinion, Lakewood Gulch, as well as the riverfront park that we own. So you'll see on this illustration, to be very candid with you, we far exceed what the 10% requirement is in terms of the open space. If you add up the acreage and the areas that we've looked at, it's about a third or a little over a third of the entire development site. So we've tried to be really thoughtful in terms of where these spaces are located. And right now, we're not coming to you with park plans. We're not coming to you with open space plans. Tonight, what we'd like to do is Andy and I would like to share with you our ideas about these different spaces and our initial thoughts in terms of the character of these spaces and what they could be in the future. And so again, we talked a little bit about Festival Street, and this is an image that actually shows the level of density that we consider we're wanting to encourage in terms of the adjacent land uses and the density that we would like to activate this.
And it's really important, Don, that we have that in order to create that everyday neighborhood that Matt spoke of. In order to have a restaurant successful in March, when there's no football on, we need a certain critical mass and a great mix of both residential and commercial activities, entertainment activities, places to live, work, and play. And this image of Festival Street shows not only that activity that can happen all year round, but also the level of intensity that lines that street in order to create that everyday neighborhood.
Yeah. The riverfront park, River Mile has gone a long ways. I want to compliment all of the good work and planning and design that River Mile has done technically and otherwise to activate the plot. We have less of an area, but it's equally as important. And so whether it is a soft edge, whether it's a riparian edge, or whether it's a structured edge, we have yet to determine that based on the uses and activities and facilities that we would like our riverfront park to stage. But it's critical. It's the terminus to the Stadium Parkway, both visually and practically. It's adjacent to the Stadium Circle Drive. It hosts the trolley. And so we're working with the city on programming this space, as well as looking at the above ground and below ground subterranean infrastructure that this area houses. But we're very excited about that river's edge.
On either side of the stadium, east-west plazas, these are existing areas that we are excited to make some improvements. Anytime you bring this level of development to an area, it influences even the great open spaces that are already there. They'll remain both passive and flexible, as you can see in the upper image, and that is so that they can host a game with 75,000 people there, but also provide that place for a family to go after work and throw a ball around. Or these are really sort of neighborhood parks that primarily, and then secondarily, they can work to host a football game or a special event. We've looked very carefully at a lot of these parks around the country. What you see actually on the bottom of the screen is Bryant Park in New York City. A wonderful place with a number of different zones within the overall area. There's the great lawn, of course, that you can see in this image, but then there are moments of shade for people watching, and just a whole host of events and activities that can happen. But like I said, perhaps the most important is a neighborhood park, a place that that Denver is famous for its neighborhood parks. And every day, this can be a great place for families.
Yeah, and just to back up what Andy's saying, I think both of these areas from a programming standpoint are getting a lot of attention, and they're not insignificant. The east and west plaza areas are a little over 3 acres. The stadium park area is a little over 2.5 acres. And from a development standpoint, it's a significant contribution to the neighborhood, to the area-wide neighborhoods, as well as to this project. It's an emphasis that the ownership group has really made clear to us as the planners and designers from day one.
Lakewood Gulch sits to our south of the project, and it is currently an extremely passive space, but we envision with a lot of development here that we can make some minor improvements to that space and create better connections especially from the Decatur Federal Light Rail Station, and allow for a respite from some of the more intense parts of the development, and of course that connection, that really important connection from west to east into the Platte Valley Trail that runs north to south.
Yeah, Lakewood Gulch is interesting. Let's just be candid. Lakewood Gulch, obviously, to the south of our project, to the north of Sun Valley, is an underutilized. It's a city park. It's about 5.5 acres, and we're very excited in our early discussions and field trips with the City Parks and Recreation Department and with Dottie is, what are the potential uses? What are the potential opportunities of not only connecting but relating to Lakewood Gulch and making it a very real place? It operates now much as a riparian in terms of a floodplain area. It is a bikeway, so there's a lot of things going on, but we're really encouraged by wanting to further connect to Lakewood Gulch.
You can see here just one of the many examples of events and activities that could happen under the viaduct. This is perhaps one of the most important spaces in the development. It is by no means a residual space. It will be programmed and active throughout the year with sport courts, and it can host, as you can see here in this image, a farmer's market. There are any number of activities that can happen, and we've tried to position streets and development around it to encourage that activity, and also the eyes on the street, to have a lot of things going on around it, and to get that daylight down into it below, so that it can be really, we think of it as a park.
Yeah. It's interesting, throughout the country, 5-10 years ago, we started looking at alleyways and activating lighting alleyways throughout urban and suburban areas. But this viaduct is unique. I mean, obviously, it's historic, but it's being used now for interim parking and staging. But it's a covered area. It's an area that if it was perhaps lit in terms of neons, as Andy said, it could host a number of different activities for the neighborhoods, for the surrounding neighborhoods, that I think could be very cool in terms of looking at the food trucks, the special events, skate park, art shows, a variety of sort of active and passive uses. So we're putting that into the suite of open space and park areas as well. So overall, just in a quick summary, the open space and park is a significant attribute and element of, as it was in the master plan, it is as we move forward through the IMP process. And I hope that some of the images that we've reflected and some of the programming ideas begin to reflect that.
As we said in the beginning, this is an illustration of a preferred development scenario. We're mindful that we are not designing or developing the actual buildings, but this is a good indication of what can happen and what we hope will happen, with also an indication of what the master plan recommended, and that is a mix of building heights in carefully placed locations with different densities and different uses. And really what this seeks to encourage is to create those connections to the neighborhood. So we can provide a unique character along Old West Colfax with relatively low building envelopes that continue and extend the existing development along Colfax with steam and Mile High Station. This was also matches the recommendation of the 2013 Decatur Fed area plan, and also this medium, more medium intensity, which is really important, especially adjacent to the Decatur Fed light rail station. We need activity along that station around that station to help ridership. And then, of course, north of the viaduct, where the master plan suggested the highest levels of intensity, these developments can really help activate things like the riverfront park and create a sense of not only of enclosure, with perhaps some lower buildings in the middle, which really works very similarly to the stadium, so that everyone feels like they're looking down into the center of the development. And like we said in the beginning, even though we have some medium allowable envelopes in the northwest, we're providing parking structures and other pieces that can carefully be knitted into the landscape and allow the views that currently exist to remain. And they really anchor Stadium Parkway, which sits up here along 17th and winds its way down in front and becomes yet another street that unites both this neighborhood development and the stadium.
Yeah, and Andy, this is not by fiat. Many of you remember during the master planning process, and in particularly during the CIM, the Community Information Meeting that we hosted, that the ownership group hosted, we had a lot of different, I think 3 different views of this, and many of you weighed in terms of your preference, and it was not for a uniform, 10 stories or 15 stories or 20. It was not a uniform height bulk density relationship. There was a diversity that Andy has reflected in this scenario, this sketch, and it's one of 100 potentially for a vertical developer. But there was a preference, and people did weigh in on that level of diversity in terms of the massing that seemed to relate not only to Lakewood Gulch, but to the streetscapes and to the open space areas.
So in order to know that this configuration works and will not only provide that critical mass that we talked about to make it a successful everyday place, but also be able to host a number of jobs and a significant amount of diversity and connections and all of the things that come with that, affordable housing, and all of the community benefits that people have asked for, we have looked carefully and imagined what this might be. So we have a few images here that are pretty exciting. It sometimes can look like it's already built with these renderings. But you can see here a diversity of project types. There are, we imagine, things like a boutique hotel, some larger, taller structures for residential, some commercial, lower spaces, lower buildings along the riverfront. So it's a real mix, and we have configured the sites and the open space to allow the flexibility for a number of different uses. We're confident that all of the uses that we're mentioning can be successfully implemented here in a variety of ways. This is a fairly large development, and it'll take many years to be built out, so that we need to allow for that flexibility for the market to drive what actually gets built here. Yeah. We have another one that shows that what we're also mindful of is that we have a fairly large building, as Matt said, 1.8 million square feet, that we need to nestle up against. And in order to complement that building, we are showing a lot of different variety of building heights that really, for the most part, are about as tall as the stadium itself. Most of this development will reach a maximum of 200 to 250 feet, and the top of the lights right now are 220 feet. So there's a complementary relationship there that we are really excited about, that changes it from what it is now, this large building which sits surrounded by parking lots. This is a way, much like Coors Field does in Lodo, that they can complement each other and fit together. The other thing that you see here is that there will be design standards that encourage a variety of building mass and scale. There are a number of devices and constraints that will be used to require setbacks and smaller floor plates as buildings get taller, so that the views go through this development, that views which exist now of downtown and of downtown back to the mountains can continue to remain and be enjoyed by everyone outside of this development and inside. So that critical space between the buildings is just as important as the buildings themselves.
Yeah, and I think what Jim and Matt opened the sort of update with is that we're focused obviously on the horizontal level of improvements in terms of the infrastructure, the mobility, the parks, and the open space. But what Andy has been illustrating is sort of the lock-block relationship that we've sort of proven to ourselves that begins to make a little bit of sense, that there's a rhyme and a reason to the street and mobility network, to the dedication of the open space and pocket parks network, and the configuration of the building massing that will be coupled, as Andy said, with you can count on very detailed planning design standards and guidelines to activate those first several floors to make sure that our streetscape and the overall project work well. So these are test scenarios that we're sort of testing to ourselves. Does this begin to make some sense? And is there a capacity to deal with it?
And finally, you can see here the difference of the first slide and this last slide of what happens when all of this comes together. And again, we feel like this is an appropriate level of intensity with a significant amount of open space. When you add it all up, it almost is a third of the project in open space, and a level of intensity that still allows what we were talking about, this porosity through the development so that views of downtown remain. We're also showing what has been approved, the zoning and envelopes that have been approved for the River Mile project, and you can see there's this great opportunity for connections from downtown through Lodo along the river, and onto Sun Valley neighborhood with other very carefully placed uses like parking that we mentioned at the perimeter and in a way that can be lower to allow the views throughout the city to remain.
Andy, could you go back to that prior image real quickly? One thing just occurred to me that we didn't talk about, which is always one of the first questions that we get, is what are we going to do about the parking? This development encompasses about, I think it's 52 or 53 acres of existing parking that's out there today. The plan to replace that parking, which is just over 3,000 spaces, which we are required to do and certainly want to do for game day and other large events, is to construct and have the Metropolitan Improvement District construct one primary freestanding garage, which Andy, you might want to point out there in the lower left-hand area of this image, and then this is all conceptual. That would accommodate about a third of those 3,000 spaces, and the other 2,000 would be a shared relationship with the office portion of this development, whose garages on Sunday afternoon are typically very empty, as they are on a Monday night or a Thursday night when there might be a football game. That model basically works at Coors Field. And it works in many other NFL cities as well. So I just wanted to point that out again. That's one of the first questions we seem to get on the development. So if you want to slide on to the last slide. So once again, we really appreciate the time that you guys have taken to join us here. Hopefully it's provided a good update for you. We would welcome any comments, questions going forward at the stadiuminvestmentcorp.com website, which I will tell you and warn you is a very, very new website. There's not a whole lot to it yet, but there is an area or section where you can submit comments or questions to us, and we promise to respond to those questions. And Matt Sugar, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I just want to thank everybody for participating in this. I know, we tend to hurry up and wait, and especially in the world of COVID-19, and that's kind of where we are. We're moving forward, but we're moving a little bit at the snail's pace. We're out in the community. We're doing what we can do, given the circumstances we're under, and all of us are under. So I appreciate you all taking the time to pay attention to this, and hopefully in the future we can really start to roll on this. And again, please send your comments to the stadiuminvestmentcorp.com. And again, it's not, as Jim described, it's kind of an under construction site, but we will get the information and we'll respond to it. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you Councilwoman Torres and Sandoval for participating, and all of you. It's much appreciated.
Be safe, everyone. Good night.
Good night.